All right. Good evening again. So, what we do on a Thursday evening, I have 4 different areas that I talk about, and we cycle it through, so it keeps things a little mixed up. And the one this month is a topic that I choose. It's just a dharma topic that I choose, and the topic for tonight is the Jhanas. So first off, a little bit of explanation on what the Jhanas are, and then I will talk through the process of stepping through the Jhanas. The word in, that's a Pali word, which is the language that the Theravadan and many of the South Asian texts are written in. The classic Indian religious language is Sanskrit, and many of the words are very similar. In Sanskrit, the word is dhyana. Dhyana, as Buddhism moved from India east and went to China, was transliterated in China as Chan, dhyana, Chan. And then when Buddhism jumped the China Sea and went to Japan, Chan became Zen. So when we hear of Zen Buddhism, the word Zen in Zen Buddhism is just simply saying the core of Buddhism is this meditation thing, is this set of concentration practices, the jhanas. So they call the practice Zen. That's the etymology of that word. So jhana they are absorption states, concentration states. When we sit in meditation, the Buddha's core teaching is the 4 Noble Truths, which are that every conditioned thing contains within it dukkha, suffering, discomfort, stress. Talks about what the cause of that is, which is craving. It's our desire to hold on to things that fundamentally we can't hold on to because they're impermanent, and that causes this dukkha. The third is that it's possible to end it, and we see that with people who have an easier path through life than most of us, and we see that they're much more relaxed, and we see it in our own practice as things get lighter and get easier over time. And the fourth is the path, the Noble Eightfold Path. And the Noble Eightfold Path, I won't talk through them all, but the 8th step is right concentration. And if you look within the literature about how right concentration is described and defined, it is simply the jhanas. This is concentration. This is what right concentration means, and it is one of the major steps in the path to release. And it's a release from suffering. This thing we think of as enlightenment or as awakening, it is just being released from this ongoing, constant background noise of stress and discomfort. It's being released from that. That's what this practice is about. So the jhanas are a description of what happens when we settle into meditation. It's as simple as that. And it can be used in 2 ways. One, it is just simply a description of what happens naturally if we sit for long periods of time, over years, and for long periods of time, over time. This settling that I'm going to describe just happens naturally. And as we become familiar with the terrain of meditation, we become better able to navigate that subtlety, and the description of the jhanas can then be used as a map to help us navigate when we're in this meditation. So, the first instruction, so there are 4 material jhanas and 4 immaterial jhanas. I'll certainly talk through the first 3 in some detail, and then probably sort of skim the rest more quickly. The first instruction, and it's the basic instruction for meditation, is go find a quiet place. Congratulations, you all did that tonight. Well done. Find a quiet place, somewhere that's secluded. And generally it talks about by the trunk of a tree or in an abandoned dwelling. But it's a place where it's quiet, away from noise, you're not going to be disturbed. So you can sit still. And if you sit still, actually before I go there, tell a little story about Buddha. He he practiced. I mean, there's the story of how he left the palace and he went off on his own. And he worked with different teachers and this and that. And he found that he was getting very advanced in his practice. He was finding states of real peace and real joy, but he realized he wasn't getting what he was looking for. And then he remembered the story of the rose apple tree, as it's called. And he remembered when he was a young man, unclear how old, he may have been a child, sort of 8 or 10, he may have been an adolescent, it's unclear. But he was a young man, and he was out in the field. It was a beautiful day, much like today, not too hot, not too cold, just a beautiful sunny day. And he sat in the field underneath the rose apple tree. And he just sat there. And he settled, and he found this place of great peace, great joy, just sitting out there still in nature. And so as the adult on his quest, maybe that's the way in. Maybe that's what I need to do to start with. So that actually is the map for the first jhana. First jhana, the description is applied and sustained thought was joy and pleasure accompanied by applied and sustained thought. So what those mean, I'll do it in reverse order. Applied and sustained thought, we're in seclusion, no background noise. Sensory inputs are coming down, but we're still here and we're very much aware we're in the body and we're following the breath, or we're applying ourselves to something. And there's effort in it, there's mental effort, there's a focus, we're paying attention to what we're doing, we're logical and measured in what we're doing, and we're monitoring it. So there's the applied thought, which is the deciding what we're going to do, there's the investigation of what's going on, and then there's the sustained thought, which is staying present. So still got a very active, logical mind at this point. And as we settle in this seclusion with this logical mind helping us navigate settling down, what happens is in this stillness, as things settle down, the subtle body starts to become more present. Now, what I mean by the subtle body, we think of following our breath. The word for breath in Pali and Sanskrit is around prana. Pranayama is the practice of breath control, which itself is a practice. Prana, the root, means life. In Hebrew, the word for breath is ruach, something like that, which also means spirit or life. In English, I just use the word spirit. Inspire, respiration. The root of this is the same. It's spirit. So today, when we look at our breath, we just tend to think of air going in and out. And following your breath is just following this air. But the root of breathing is this energy, it's spirit. God breathes life into humankind. So the root of this is the spirit, and as we settle in and we follow the breath, allowing soft edges around that breath, allowing ourselves to recognize there's more going on than just air going in. There's energy flowing around it. Starting to touch into that energy and notice that energy, we can find ourselves naturally, as breath settles down from the chest into the abdomen, breathing in and out of the abdomen. And we are, because there's energy moving in there. It's not just an abstraction. This is a way of visualizing. It's actually happening. You find pain arising in your leg. People will tell you, breathe into the pain. And you do. You breathe into it with this energy flow. And first, it can be quite forceful as we try and push it. And then as we start to get more experience, it starts to become more subtle. So the subtle body is when we start, things become quieter. We're no longer paying attention to this very gross form, this heavy physical form. And we start through the breath, tuning into this more subtle energy movement. And as that starts to happen, we start to physically feel that. And for me, that shows up as kind of each of us will experience it in a different way, but it's kind of a tingling all over, just everywhere. the whole body is just tingling. Because I'm settled enough to start noticing. But this is going on all the time. All the time. I just don't normally notice it because I'm paying too much attention outside. So we start tuning into the subtle tingling sensation, whatever that sensation is, but it's the subtle body sensation. And as we start noticing it, that can become just really rapturous. And it can get into this feedback loop. And so the joy that is being talked about is that sensation, and it can become amplified. As it gets into feedback loop, you can get things like a kundalini rush. You can get just overblown experiences of joy. And sometimes this sense of joy can become completely overwhelming, and it can take people days or weeks to really kind of come down from this high. So that's the joy. And it's not always pleasant, but that's what it means. And the pleasure, or the pleasure piece, is much more subtle, and it's the stillness. We're starting, as things settle down, to touch into the stillness, and the stillness is just peaceful, just peaceful. And the story of the rose apple tree, when we're not settled in and we're not experiencing the subtle body, what we experience is just a level of peace. It's just a lovely sunny day. We're outside. Everything's quiet. There's a few birds. There's a little bit of breeze in the trees. It's just peaceful. It's beautiful. It's really nice. So this is simply the first jhana. And with each of these jhanas, there's an analogy. There's a couple of different places where it gives analogies, but the one set of analogies I really like is water-based analogies, because they really get to, I find they really describe what's going on very, very well. So the analogy is, it's like putting soap flakes into a bowl and applying water and then kneading to make a ball of soap that you can then use to wash with. So there's flakes, and as you knead the water in, it causes the soap flakes to congeal and form this ball. And that's kind of what's going on. The applied and sustained thought, kind of efforting, they're kind of the kneading this ball to cause things to settle down. We're in this place of seclusion, but we need to do some work to really bring focus, to bring calm to them. So we're kneading this. And the water is a calm, but there's this kneading activity with the flakes. So we sit still, and then the next jhana, there's another line, there's a line I wanted to read here. I brought the print of this in. And thus he or she remains heedful, ardent, and resolute. Heedful, really paying attention. Ardent. Heedful is paying attention. Ardent is a level of effort. So this is not passive, there's effort here. And resolute, it's like, I'm working on calming. Any memories and resolve related to the household life are abandoned. What this is talking about, this applied and sustained thought, is focused on the meditation practice. It's focused on this calming activity. It's not going back and dredging in what happened at work or what the kids are doing or what I need to be thinking about for tomorrow. Those are left behind. And increasingly, as we go settle in, we're really intentional leaving all of this stuff behind. And with their abandoning, the mind gathers and settles inwardly, grows unified and concentrated. And as we settle in a meditation, we can feel naturally that happens. The mind calms and settles inward. It becomes inwardly focused. And it grows unified. There's a kind of coherence that happens around the mind. It's not distracted and bouncing off lots of things. It kind of comes together. So the second jhana, this stabilization, this centralizing continues, calming continues, and as it continues to calm, concentration tightens. I have come to think of concentration as a word in Pali, which is ikagata, single-pointedness, the idea that we're focused on a single thing. But it's not a point. It's not like focusing on the tip of this microphone. That's very unstable. You focus on the tip of a microphone, if you stand on the tip there, somebody just nudges you and you fall right off. The same is true with our thoughts. If we're concentrated on this very, very fine point, it's not stable concentration. We're concentrated on a theme, on a place, on an idea, and it becomes not so much concentrating on something, and it'll become clearer as I go through this why it's not concentrating on something, because it's a practice of letting go. And if we concentrate on something, we're reifying it. It's a practice of the concentration not being distracted, and leaving behind these householder cares is a large part of this not being distracted. So we're not letting the mind be pulled away. We're increasingly narrowing our focus and becoming more resilient to things coming in from outside and trying to distract us. We're becoming more stable. And as that happens, this ikagata, this single pointedness, isn't a single point, it's a single realm, and it becomes broader and more stable. So there's this virtuous cycle going on here. As we settle in, concentration becomes broader and more stable, which allows us to settle in more. So the second jhana, as we settle in, it's joy and rapture born of concentration. With the subsiding of applied and sustained thought, there is joy and pleasure born of concentration, not of seclusion, of concentration. The concentration has become stronger. As our concentration has become stronger, there's not even room in that concentration for the rational mind to start bouncing around and directing things. That just fades away. It's like a scene I remember from the movie The Lord of the Rings, where Gollum is having an internal debate with himself, like the Sméagol and Gollum are the two voices. And at some point, Sméagol is the old human, the old being,
thing. Yeah.
Hobbit-esque thing, that became Gollum when it became obsessed with the ring. And somewhere in this internal debate, Sméagol looks around and Gollum's still talking. He's gone, I'm free. The voice had stopped. And at some point you look around, it's like, oh, the voices have stopped. There's just this place of calm. And it's not oblivion. There's awareness, and there's a form of thinking, there's a form of direction going on, there's a form of managing this concentration flow. But these logical voices aren't showing up in the same way. They're gone. So you've got this joy and pleasure born of concentration. As concentration becomes more stable. And the analogy given there is of a lake surrounded by mountains. And the lake is being fed by springs from the bottom and rain from the top. So the lake, it's the calm, it's the peace. And it's being fed from above and below. We're still working on it. It's still not stable. There's still some efforting around this space to build and sustain this sense of peace. And it's surrounded by these mountains. And for me, these mountains are this residual sensation of the supple body, which is where this joy is landing. So there's this peace, which is this beautiful, calm space in the middle of this very nice but energetic joy. So that's the description that's given for the second jhana. The third jhana, things keep on getting calmer. And what happens next? Well, the most gross thing that's left is this subtle body, and that just kind of fades away. And as we settle, we can kind of move some effort towards making that happen, towards helping that happen, and we can watch it just naturally happen. But it does. I mean, what's happening is, just as we become more subtle in our awareness, that just kind of starts shimmering and dissipating, and it just fades away, it just kind of settles down. And so what's left is just this peace with mindfulness, with being present with this peace. And the description there, it's called a pleasant abiding, and it really is. It's a beautiful place to be. It's so calm, so peaceful. It is a pleasure that just can't be described. It's a pleasure beyond any pleasure listening, much better than a bowl of ice cream, right? Or the cookies and tea we're going to have. It's really sweet and pleasant. And once you start getting into these places, people can kind of get addicted to these pleasures and think of these as an end in themselves, which we'll get to because that can be a problem. But this is just really calm, pleasant. And the analogy there is of a pond, flat, still pond, with lotuses growing up in the pond. And the lotus grows from the mud and the dirt at the bottom of the pond. The lotus is a metaphor in Buddhism for awakening. And it's a metaphor for a couple of different reasons. The most obvious one is it grows from the mud and muck at the bottom of the pond. And it comes through the dirt, through this stagnant water, and it comes to the top. And you get beautiful white flowers. So you've got the white flower of awakening coming from this dirt and grime of this everyday life of suffering. So it's a metaphor in that regard. Another reason for it being used as a metaphor is you have the flower and the seeds are there at the same time. There are very few flowers, in fact, it's the only one I know of. There are very few flowers where you have the flower and the seeds at the same time. What happens with most plants is they flower, you get this whole pollen and stamen and that kind of stuff happens in the middle, and the insects or birds come in and mix the pollen into the ovary part of the flower, I can't remember what it's called. And then the flower collapses as the sexual organs of the plant collapse in and form the seeds. So then you start the seeding process and fruiting. But the lotus, you have the body with the seeds in it and the flower at the same time. So you've got the seed of awakening and the awakening itself, and it's another beautiful metaphor. So you've got this very still pond, very still, very peaceful. And we're settled in that pond. Sometimes we're at the top and we're in the sun. Sometimes we're in the still water. We've not even come to the surface. There's not even the disturbance of the ripples and the wind across the top of the pond. Very peaceful. So I find these analogies, these similes to be really, really useful and really descriptive of what's going on. So the jhanas, they continue settling. The next jhana is equanimity, which is not being disturbed by anything. It's beyond pleasure and pain. So beyond pleasure and pain means there's this, we've been sitting for 2, 5, 10 hours. There's no way the legs are not cramping. There's no way that there's not physiological stuff going on. We normally have us screaming and adjusting our posture. But when we're in that place, it doesn't register. It just doesn't register. Because we're in a place of such concentration that these physical sensations don't penetrate. Still form bound, and then start moving into what are called the immaterial jhanas. So we've gone from the place where we're full of desire and we're caught up on, I like the taste of tea, I like the taste of the cookies, I like the weather, I like having conversations, I like meeting nice people, I like all of these things, moving into from the desire to form, which is where we're just dealing with the body and watching the body settle down, which is what just happened. And then we move into the formless realm where, as Dogen said, that's a dropping off body mind. There's none of this formless. There's just kind of a mind realm, but its mind doesn't quite get it. But it's we've left the body behind. We're experiencing existence without being constrained by this body. And the first step of that is our concentration starts to recognize the artificiality of the boundaries that we see as body. And there are different ways of talking about doing this. You can start to see the edges of the body just shimmering, and awareness just leaks out, and awareness starts to expand. Another way of describing what's going on here, and it starts to become important as we move through these jhanas, a fundamental premise of this clinging, Buddha said, somebody said to Buddha, so you've got this escalation of stuff we've talked about, which is how suffering arises. It's a 12-link chain of causation, which says we start off with ignorance and we move on through, and then we have these initial contacts, and that contact leads to whether we like it or we don't like it. And if we like it, we want to hold on to it, we crave it, and then we cling. With clinging comes all this identification and ego and selfing and all these nasty things that cause suffering happen. So the question is, so who clings? Because clinging is the problem. It's when we cling to something, we can't possibly hold on to it. It's going to come to an end. So clinging onto something causes suffering. Who clings? He said, it's not a well-formed question. I said, with craving comes clinging. If there is craving, then clinging follows. I didn't say anybody craves. I didn't say anybody clings. I said, with craving, clinging follows. And that clinging, precisely that is what gives rise to this mistaken sense of a separate self that suffers. There is no such thing as a separate self. In reality, it's a story we make up. And it's a beautiful story. And it can be an absolutely wonderful story to live into. But if we can't see through it and see the artificiality of that, then we get caught up in taking it to be too real. We take these selves to be too real, and that causes suffering. So the practice of settling into the jhanas, the practice of settling into meditation, is incrementally letting go of all of these layers upon layers upon layers of fabrication, of creating these things that I held on to. So the thoughts go away. The first thing we identify, the really gross thing, is our thinking mind, and those wandered off. And then the layers of this body, every atom in this body arrived within the last 7 years. There's not a single atom in this body that was here 7 years ago. This is all food I have eaten. All of this is food I've eaten. Totally impermanent, totally fluid, constantly changing. The idea that it's a standalone thing is just such a mistake. So we start letting go of these, and as we settle down, the process becomes incrementally letting go of these misconceived ideas. So the one I'm on right now is this idea of ourselves as a physical form that's separate from other physical forms. So moving from these material jhanas into the immaterial jhanas and letting this sense of boundless space emerge is just letting go of the sense of this constrained physicality. And then we're in boundless space and we notice, well, I'm kind of holding on to the idea of space. So we let go of space and move into boundless consciousness. Well, there's holding on to this idea of consciousness. So we move from there and we keep on moving and letting go of layer after layer. So we let go of consciousness, moves us into a place of no thing or nothingness. In the realm of nothingness, there is still a perception. There is still a perception of nothing. So we let go of that very perception. And then ultimately we move into this complete release from all of these constructions. And there is nobody who's released. That's the trick. This idea, I said it in the dedication of merit, this complete release. There is nobody who's released. Because there wasn't anybody here to begin with. It's an illusion. An easy way to see this illusion is I'm Gareth, the guiding teacher, right here, right now. When I go home, I'll be Gareth, the husband, Gareth, the householder, Gareth, the pet owner. When I go for breakfast with my son tomorrow, Saturday, I'll be Gareth, the dad. These are all different people. Sometimes they're radically different. But we just take these clothes off and put new clothes on all the time. We're constantly reshaping ourselves. So there's no static me in here. It is how we get stuck. I was going to talk. I'll just mention it because I'll tell you that I was going to talk about it, but I've been talking for a long time, so I'll stop. I was going to spend some time talking about the Brahma Viharas. The Brahma Viharas are loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy and equanimity. And there's something we cultivate. So we cultivate loving kindness towards others, and we radiate this loving kindness outwards towards everybody. And this radiation of loving kindness brings a kind of stillness internally as we sit in meditation and engage in this practice. And that stillness is another gateway into these settled concentrations. And by really bringing ourselves into these Brahmavihara practices, we can bring ourselves also into these settled concentration states. So the two blur, and the Buddha often brings the two together. I'll run through the four material jhanas and then jump straight through into starting to talk about the Brahmaviharas. But I think I've talked for enough, so that's for another day.